Thank you for allowing us to prepare this business expansion proposal for Pleasurecraft Inc. We are sensitive to your dilemma as you have felt your current personal watercraft and snowmobile lines were maturing. We believe that our analysis will provide you with a detailed outlook of potential revenue for Pleasurecraft's future. The two options that you asked us to analyze for the expansion were the small front-end loaders and the outboard motor. We utilized all the information that your team lead, Nancy Cummins, had prepared for our analysis, and we'll be referencing that as well as the findings of our own research as we proceed with our findings. While we know that Pleasurecraft is in Canada, these U.S. numbers are relative to your business expansion. In the United States alone, the construction industry has expenditures of over $1.2 trillion per year, with construction sites holding one of the heaviest positions in the U.S. economy. This enormous spending is good news for the country's top 10 manufacturers, which are all poised to be in direct competition with your new project as competitive front-end loader manufacturers. The companies on this list will be your main competition. The market doesn't seem to be oversaturated, but it does have a lot of household names already selling in a market that you're trying to garner access to. In comparing the major competitors' data, you're in a position to attract investors. With all three of the top-ranked heavy equipment manufacturers, the average beta and steady stock climb are attractive from both a risk and investment return. The debt-to-equity ratios for each of the top companies are somewhat unequal to what you may see, as they're much larger companies that also manufacture mining, heavy agricultural, and construction equipment, as well as some residential and all-terrain products, which are not competitive with Pleasurecraft. Those products cannot be broken out on their financial statements, but we can be reasonably expected to cause higher debt as their large market variety increase. The low debt-to-equity ratio of Komatsu may be an indication that the company is not taking advantage of financing opportunities to improve their market options. This could be proven to be an attractive benefit for your venture. While many of the aspects of your investment into outboard motor manufacturing are quite similar to the heavy equipment manufacturers, the top outboard motor manufacturers are more limited in scope. These include Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, Mercury, and Takedo. These corporations may also compete on the international markets, and they do not take into consideration the world leaders in the industries overseas. For the outboard motor companies, the top two have a significantly lower beta. These could again be due to the market being all-inclusive of automobile, motorcycle, and other motorized products, and not necessarily a reflection of outboard motors in general. Each of the outboard motor competitors have a positive debt-to-equity ratio, and this would be indicative of a viable market for you to enter. In an era of worldwide economic downturn, the survival and competitiveness of manufacturing firms depend on their practices and capabilities to adapt to external environments, which are attributed to changes in customer preferences, government regulations, technology, and competitors. The customers evolve over time, whether it's front-end loaders or outboard motors, those facts remain. But customer expectations remain constant. One major difference in the two markets for you to consider is the demands of the customer and what drives those demands. With the front-end loader manufacturing, the customer base is likely to be commercial. It's with service and warranty fulfillment being tied to project timelines, operator wages, and other loss of project costs if there's unforeseen downtime. With the outboard motors, it's likely that the customer focuses on personal watercraft, something more familiar to you from your extensive personal watercraft and snowmobile success. Because there are viable competitive options in either arena, you must establish the Pleasurecraft brand as unique. Critical to your success of entering either the outboard motor or front-end loader business, it is essential that you create a customer-focused environment. Adopting a service logic means that it should gear your activities and processes towards supporting the customer's practices, so that the value is created for both parties in those practices and ultimately in the customer's business processes. We completed a SWOT analysis on Pleasurecraft surrounding the addition of either project. So we're going to start with our strengths. Pleasurecraft Inc., of course, is a well-known organization, and your reputation has been established within your current market. You have an advantage on your competition if you were to go in the outboard motors arena because of your customer base with your current product line with snowmobiles and personal watercraft. Outboard motors would allow the company to remain in the leisure craft market and to also utilize your selling network and your current customer bases. Next, we have the weaknesses. If you were to branch out into the front end loaders, you would have to hire regional, national managers, and additional sales employees. You would also have to build your client base from the ground up because you are not selling in that market currently. And you currently in your company do not have that sales experience in the front end loaders. So you also would be competing with well-established manufacturers in the front end loader business. For opportunities, you have growth that can be garnered both domestic and internationally, and making sure that you're fully aware and able to comprehend what your needs are so you can strengthen your products. That growth strategy, having that will make sure that it allows the organization to achieve their overall goals. Moving on to the threats, I have to apologize, but we do have a slight error on the first bullet in our slide. It should say both projects, because both projects would run the risk of taxing your capital budget because both of them have to have a new facility, purchasing property, as well as new equipment to actually manufacture the products. Additionally, another threat is competitors selling the same products. The competition within that market can be extremely high. For your outboard motors, we wouldn't so much say it's a new entry into that it's low, but for the front end loaders, this is a new entry in that will be low in the current market because of the amount to make these products can be at a higher cost margin. Additionally, a change in currency exchange rates would be considered a threat. Being in Canada and shipping internationally or selling internationally, we would run into an exchange rate. For your overall strategy, maintaining a competitive advantage within the market, as well as analyzing your strengths and weaknesses, as we did in the SWOT analysis. With all the information gathered, you will be able to further assist you in your decision-making processes, determining strategy through different types of analysis, such as break-even, scenario, or sensitivity. Additionally, your strategy can be enhanced by determining your leading source of capital, and then decide which source of capital generates the best value for the lowest buck. If you only devote your time and contribute your funds to projects that bring financial stability and worth to the organization, this also will help your overall strategy. And closely examining and analyzing all the markets by using a SWOT analysis. With the use of this analysis, it helps your organization develop full awareness of all the factors involved making that appropriate business decision. This could also assist the company overcome the challenges that may face, as well as determining what new opportunities to pursue. Let's move on to the evaluation portion. We evaluated both of the projects separately, and there were many factors that we considered. The initial costs, cash flows, and cost of capital, as well as net present value and the internal rate of return. So let's start with our front-end loader project. As we've already stated, your main challenge for this project is breaking out into a market where you've not sold before. Additionally, you have to develop that sales force. And when you develop that sales force, you've also added in the 2% commission for your sales team. And we added that to your cash flows. When we calculated the annual cash flows, we did it for the total of 15 years, which you stated would be the term for the product line that you would determine at the end of the 15 years what you would do with it. So in our analysis, we added the salvage value for the land, building, and equipment in year 15. When we figured up the flotation costs, we did that on the assumed target capital structure of 30% debt, 70% equity. And the cost of issuing new equity at 8% and debt was at 3%. And that gave us an average for the flotation cost of 6.5%. As we were instructed, we used the gross capital requirement calculations for the initial investment. The total flotation costs were $1.2 million, and we added that to the $17 million initial investment for a total of $18.2 million for the gross capital requirements for that expansion. Now, this project is risky due to the cyclical nature of the construction industry. The cost of equity was figured with the capital asset pricing model, and the current cost of capital did not take into consideration the risk. And instead of using the beta that your team had calculated, we used the average of the competitors listed in Exhibit 3. That calculated beta was 1.196. We did use the proxy 6% risk rate that was provided from the 10-year Treasury bond, and then the return on market was figured by averaging the market returns from Exhibit 2. We added those flotation costs in with all of the other information and came up with a cost of equity equal to 15.42%. Now, the cost of debt had been assumed to be equal to the recent 10-year bond issue of the company with a coupon rate of 8%. We also added the flotation cost to the cost of debt, and that total came out to 5.63%. Based on those calculations, we arrived at the cost of capital of being 12.48%. Using the net flows and the cost of capital, we calculated the net present value being $17.8 million, and the internal rate of return for the project has been computed using the initial gross investment of $18.2 million, and it ended up being 23%. This seems to be, based on financials, a very positive project. Now let's move on to the outboard motor project evaluation. The annual cash flows have been computed for the 20-year life of the project. There weren't any cash flows for a sales team because you stated you wouldn't hire another sales force for this product. We did add the sales commission into the cash flows of 1%. And in our analysis, we added the salvage for the land and the building in year 20. The equipment salvage was negligible, so it was omitted. The total flotation costs were $989,000, which we added to the $15 million initial investment for a total of $15.989 million. And that was for gross capital requirement. The risk for the outboard project is equal to the current level of risk of the company, so the current beta of 1.38 was used. Additionally, all the other figures for the front-end loader project for the cost of capital were identical and used in this calculation. The cost of capital for the project is 12.89%. And using the cash flows and the cost of capital, the net present value for this project is $17.8 million with an internal rate of return of 24%. Again, this is a positive project, just like the front-end loader project showed. Pleasurecraft had previously used the Treasury approach to estimate cost of debt and historical average risk premium for cost of equity, and it had relied on internal funds and debt to fund its projects. But with the two current projects being considered by the company, they're much larger in scope and size. So you have to determine if you want to try to raise $20 million in new equity. And there are three main financing options for the company. Our first one we're going to talk about is retained earnings. And it's generally internally generated funds and utilizing that to try and meet your future capital needs. The pros of this are the primary advantage of retained earnings is that there's no cost of financing and you don't have to go into further debt. Using retained earnings also strengthens the stability of the company because it enhances the market value of the company and it makes your financial position stronger. Now, on the other side, the cons, The risk in using the internal funds is that if used incorrectly, it could result in financial stranglehold on the company in the future. Furthermore, if the company uses retained earnings for business reasons, the shareholders cannot realize the full earnings of the company by way of their larger dividends. The next option for you that is available is to use debt financing. The pros is the advantages of this type of financing is that it allows the company to make investments in the property, plant, and equipment before your project actually generates the needed returns. The company can also take on a more aggressive strategy if it's able to get the financing at a lower interest rate. Additionally, you maintain control of the company as opposed to common stock, and the earnings are not diluted. The company also gets tax relief on your interest, and it reduces the overall cost of capital, maximizing the wealth of your shareholders. Now, on the cons, the biggest disadvantage is that the debt will have to be repaid at a point in the future. And on top of the debt is also interest that's paid over the period of the debt. The debt's usually secured on the assets of the business, and if you fail to repay the debt, then your business can be liquidated. The final financing option for the company is equity financing. The main advantage of this method is that equity will not have to be repaid in the future. Any risk incurred by the business and the liabilities would also be shared by your new investors. Because equity doesn't have to be repaid, that positive cash flow that's generated can be used to grow the business in the present and also in the future. Additionally, if the company keeps a low debt to equity ratio, the financial position of the company is enhanced. Now, the main disadvantage of equity financing is that when equity is issued, some control of the company is lost, and the earnings per share declines. The decision makers for the business are also partially given over to some of the new investors. A part of the profits also has to be paid out to the new equity investors. These profits could be greater than the interest paid on debt in the long term, which also makes it riskier for the company than debt financing. Both of these projects have very significant costs, and we do not see that you would be able to fund them internally. According to your research, you also said you had to make a $5 million investment from the current year's budget for renovations on your equipment and buildings so that you could comply with health and safety regulations. So our recommendation to you is to fund the projects with a combination of debt and equity. The target debt is 30% debt, 70% equity. Both projects are sizable and have a positive net present value. The internal rate of return are also positive on both of them. So theoretically, you could take on both projects. But if you decided to do that, your financing required would increase up to $33.9 million, meaning that you had projected to generate $20 million in equity for your current year, but we still have to remove the $5 million that you got earmarked for other improvements. So the rest would have to be generated through debt financing. That could mess up your desired target capital structure from 30 to 70 and also increase your cost of capital. After looking at the numbers and qualitative factors for both projects, we can see that there are benefits and risks for both projects. Based on the net present value and the internal return rates, either project could be taken on. Therefore, taking everything into account, those factors, the financing mix, the flotation costs, and sales experience, the best choice, in our opinion, is to invest in the outboard motor project. This project has a lot in common with your snowmobiles and watercraft lines, and you would not have to hire a new sales force, and it has a lower risk. And the gross capital requirement is $15,989, and you could use your retained earnings for all but $1 million of the project if you chose to. So our recommendation is the outboard motor project, and we think this would be ideal as an investment for Pleasurecraft Inc.